The gleaming halls of the Galactic Medical Academy buzzed with nervous energy on the morning of the new term. Sunlight from 3 different stars filtered through the transparent dome above, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Today was different from any other first day in the Academy's 1,000-year history. They were getting their first human instructor. Professor Tom Walker stood outside his assigned classroom, straightening his standard-issue medical uniform. At 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, he towered over most of the alien staff who hurried past him. Some gave him quick, nervous glances. Others changed course entirely to maintain what they considered a safe distance from the Deathworlder. The Academy's director, a tall, willowy being with silvery skin named First Teacher Root, approached Tom with careful steps. "Professor Walker, your students await. Are you certain you wish to proceed with this demonstration you mentioned?" Tom nodded, his expression serious but friendly. "Yes, First Teacher. They need to understand the basics of human first aid. It's crucial for any medical professional who might encounter human patients. But the methods you described..." Root's silvery skin rippled with concern. "They seem rather violent." "What seems violent to you might be life-saving for us," Tom replied patiently. "That's exactly why this course is necessary." Taking a deep breath, Tom entered the classroom. 30 pairs of eyes, some compound, some bioluminescent, some behind protective shields, turned to stare at him. The students represented 15 different species from across the galaxy, each with their own unique biology and medical needs. In the front row, a blue-skinned aquatic student with gill slits quickly closed their breathing vents. 2 rows back, an insectoid student's antennae twitched nervously. Near the back, a crystalline being shifted, their silicon-based form catching the light. "Good morning, class," Tom said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm Professor Tom Walker, and I'll be teaching you emergency medical response with a focus on Class 12 species, what you call Deathworlders." A ripple of nervous movement passed through the room. One student, their gas-filled body gently pulsing, raised an appendage. "Yes," Tom pointed to them. "Professor, is it true that humans deliberately break each other's rib cages as a medical procedure?" Tom couldn't help but smile. "You're referring to CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and while broken ribs can be a side effect, it's not the goal. We'll cover that in detail, but first, let's talk about why such methods exist." He activated the classroom's holoprojector, displaying an image of Earth. "Humans evolved on what you classify as a Class 12 death world. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, dangerous wildlife, natural disasters, all these factors shaped our biology." The crystalline student's voice chimed like bells. "But surely with modern medical technology, such primitive methods are unnecessary." "Technology can fail," Tom replied. "Power can go out. Equipment can break. Besides, in an emergency, minutes or even seconds count. Sometimes, the only tools available are your own hands." He pulled out a medical training dummy, specially designed to simulate human physiology. Several students flinched at its realistic appearance. "This term, you'll learn things that might seem shocking at first. You'll see methods that look aggressive or even dangerous. But remember, what works for one species might kill another. As medical professionals, you need to understand these differences." The aquatic student spoke up, their voice bubbling through the water-breathing apparatus. "Will we have to practice these methods?" "Eventually, yes. But we'll start slow. Theory first, then supervised practice. Safety protocols will always be in place." Tom looked around the classroom, meeting each student's eyes. "I know this is different from what you're used to. But think about it this way. Somewhere out there, a human might need your help someday. Wouldn't you want to know how to save them?" The room fell silent as the students processed this. Finally, the insectoid student's antennae perked up. "Professor, when do we start?" Tom smiled, feeling the tension in the room begin to ease. "Right now. Let's begin with the basics of human vital signs and why they might seem alarming to non-human medical staff." As he began his lecture, Tom noticed small signs of curiosity replacing fear in his students' expressions. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sometimes, he thought, the first step toward understanding was simply being willing to learn. Today, Tom announced to his class a week later, we're going to have our first practical demonstration of CPR. The medical dummy lay on the examination table in the center of the classroom. Tom had specifically requested one with force sensors to show the students exactly how much pressure was needed for effective chest compressions. Blue, the aquatic student who had slowly moved to the front row over the past week, leaned forward with interest. Their gill filters bubbled softly as they asked, "Professor, won't that much force damage the internal organs?" "Good question," Tom replied. He gestured to the dummy. "That's exactly why we're going to learn about the human ribcage's remarkable ability to protect vital organs while still allowing for emergency procedures." Reed, the insectoid student, clicked their mandibles nervously. Their compound eyes reflected the bright classroom lights as they watched Tom position himself beside the dummy. "First, we locate the correct hand position." Tom placed his palms in the center of the dummy's chest. "Then we prepare to compress the chest cavity by approximately 2 inches. A collective gasp arose from the class. Stone, the crystalline student, actually chimed in distress. 2 inches? Professor, that's nearly 5 centimeters. Correct, Tom said calmly. Watch carefully. He began compressions, and the sound of the dummy's chest cavity compressing filled the room. Several students moved back instinctively. The force sensors displayed the pressure readings on the classroom's main screen, showing exactly how much force Tom was applying. "Notice how I'm keeping my arms straight," Tom explained between counts. "The force comes from my upper body weight, not just arm strength." 30 compressions, then 2 rescue breaths. Blue raised an appendage. "Professor, what if the patient's ribs break?" Tom completed his set of compressions before answering. "In real situations, ribs often do break. But remember what we discussed last week about human healing capabilities. A broken rib will heal. Death from cardiac arrest won't." The class fell silent at this stark statement. Tom moved on to demonstrate rescue breaths, tilting the dummy's head back to open the airway. "Now," he said, straightening up, "who would like to try?" No one moved. Even Blue, usually the most eager, seemed hesitant. "Come on," Tom encouraged. "The dummy has safety limiters. You can't hurt it." Finally, Reed stepped forward, their segmented legs clicking against the floor. I will try it, Professor." Tom smiled encouragingly. "Excellent. Remember, locate the center of the chest first." Reed's 4-fingered hands looked strange against the human-shaped dummy's chest, but they positioned them correctly. However, when they began compressions, they'd barely dented the surface. "More force," Tom instructed. "Remember the pressure readings we just saw." Reed pressed harder, their exoskeleton creaking slightly with effort. The force sensors barely registered half the necessary pressure. "I cannot," Reed chittered anxiously. "It feels like I'm trying to crush them." "You're doing fine," Tom assured them. "Try using your upper body weight, like I showed you." It took several more attempts, but finally Reed managed to achieve the correct depth. The force sensors flashed green, and a small cheer went up from the class. "Excellent work," Tom praised. "Who's next?" To everyone's surprise, Stone glided forward. Their crystalline forms sparkled as they positioned themselves by the dummy. "Be careful of your density," Tom warned. "Your silicone-based form is much heavier than human tissue." Stone nodded, their faceted surface reflecting understanding. They began compressions with remarkable precision, their mineral body allowing for exact control of force. As more students took turns practicing, Tom noticed something changing in the room. The initial horror was giving way to focused concentration. Even those who couldn't physically perform the compressions watched intently, asking detailed questions about hand position and timing. By the end of the class, every student who was physically capable had attempted CPR at least once. As they filed out, Tom overheard Blue telling Reed, Maybe it's not so violent after all. It's just different. Tom smiled to himself. Progress was being made, one compression at a time. 2 weeks into the term, Tom's classroom had transformed. Gone were the nervous glances and fearful flinches. Instead, students clustered around holographic displays showing human anatomical systems, discussing emergency protocols with growing confidence. The most important concept in human emergency medicine, Tom explained, pointing to a timeline floating in the air, is what we call the golden hour. Blue, who had become something of a class leader, leaned forward in their water-filled seat. Why golden, Professor? Does it involve your son's radiation? It's just a term. Tom smiled. It refers to the first hour after a severe injury or medical emergency. This period is critical for human survival. Stone's crystalline form sparkled as they raised an appendage. But Professor, my species can survive for days without treatment. Why such urgency for humans? Excellent question. Tom brought up a new hologram showing human blood loss scenarios. Humans are remarkably resilient in many ways, but we're also vulnerable to rapid system failure. Take blood loss, for example. The hologram showed a human body with simulated bleeding. Red lights tracked the decreasing blood volume, while numbers counted down rapidly. A human can bleed out in minutes, Tom continued. That's why we developed quick response techniques that might seem aggressive to other species. Reed clicked their mandibles thoughtfully, like the chest compressions we learned. Exactly. Tom switched the display to show various emergency scenarios. Every technique we've learned is designed to work within this critical window. He pulled up another hologram, this one showing different alien species and their medical response times. Now let's compare. Blue's aquatic species can survive up to 3 hours without oxygenated water. Stone's crystalline form can endure extreme trauma with minimal immediate risk. Reed's species can shut down non-essential systems to survive for days. The class watched as the comparative diagrams highlighted the vast differences between species. But Tom raised a finger. What happens when you encounter a human patient? Your natural instincts about treatment urgency might be wrong. Blue's fins rippled with understanding. We might wait too long, thinking we have more time. Precisely. Tom nodded. That's why this training is so crucial. He brought up a new scenario on the main display. Let's practice. You encounter an unconscious human with a severe leg injury. What's your first step? The class had grown confident enough to call out answers. Check breathing, shouted one student. Stop the bleeding, called another. Both good, Tom confirmed. But in what order? The classroom erupted in debate. Tom watched with satisfaction as students argued their points, citing the emergency protocols they'd learned. Finally, Reed raised all 4 arms for attention. Professor, I believe I understand. The golden hour isn't just about time. It's about priorities. Go on, Tom encouraged. In my species, we prioritize preventing infection. But for humans, bleeding and breathing come first because they can kill fastest. Excellent. Tom beamed. Now you're thinking like emergency responders. He switched the display to show a complex flowchart. This is a standard human emergency response protocol. Today, we'll learn how to adapt it for different species while maintaining its core principles. As the class divided into study groups, Tom noticed something remarkable. The students weren't just memorizing procedures. They were actively discussing how to modify them for different physiologies. Blue was explaining to a gaseous student how to recognize human signs of shock. Stone was demonstrating modified chest compressions that wouldn't crush a patient's ribs. Professor, Blue called out, what if we created a universal emergency guide? Something that shows how to adjust human techniques for different species. Tom paused, genuinely impressed. That's actually an excellent idea. Maybe that could be your final project. The excited chatter that followed told him his students had come further than he'd hoped. They weren't just learning human first aid. They were beginning to bridge the gap between species, one medical protocol at a time. The Academy's cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime activity. Students of various species gathered around specially designed tables, each section adapted for different atmospheric needs and dietary requirements. Tom sat with Blue, Reed, and Stone at what had become their regular table, discussing the morning's lesson about human wound treatment. A few tables away, Jack, another human student who worked in the Academy's maintenance department, was fixing a malfunctioning food dispenser. "But Professor," Blue was saying, their fins waving in confusion, "why do humans develop this fever response to infection? Isn't overheating dangerous?" Before Tom could answer, a loud clang echoed through the cafeteria. Jack had suddenly stumbled backward from the dispenser, clutching his chest. "Something's wrong," Tom said sharply, his trained eye catching the signs even from across the room. He was already rising when Jack collapsed. The cafeteria erupted in chaos. Alien students scattered, some releasing stress pheromones that made the air thick and heavy. The cafeteria staff, all from low-gravity worlds, hovered uncertainly at the edges of the scene. "Call medical response," someone shouted. "No time," Tom said, sprinting toward Jack. He could see the human's lips turning blue. "Blue, Reed, Stone. With me. Remember your training." The three students hesitated for just a moment before rushing after their teacher. They reached Jack's still form as his breathing stopped. "Cardiac arrest," Tom announced, dropping to his knees beside Jack. "Blue, start timing. Reed, clear the area. Stone, get the AED from the wall unit." To their credit, his students moved instantly. Blue activated their chronometer function, while Reed used their impressive insectoid form to create space around the victim. Stone glided swiftly to the wall where emergency equipment was stored. "Beginning chest compressions," Tom declared, positioning his hands. The cafeteria fell silent except for the rhythmic sound of compressions and Tom's steady counting. A small crowd of alien medical staff arrived, but stopped short at the sight of Tom performing what they still considered an aggressive action. "Should we stop him?" one whispered. "No." Blue's voice carried clearly through their breathing apparatus. "This is the correct procedure for humans. Professor Walker knows what he's doing." Stone returned with the AED, their crystalline fingers carefully carrying the device. "Professor, the defibrillator." "Good. Take over compressions while I set up the AED." Tom moved smoothly aside as Stone took position. The crystalline student's more dense form actually made the compressions more effective. The crowd watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as Stone maintained the steady rhythm they'd practiced in class. Tom quickly attached the AED pads to Jack's chest. "Clear," he called out, and Stone smoothly pulled back. The AED analyzed, then delivered its shock. Jack's body jerked, and the alien observers made various sounds of distress. "Resume compressions," Tom ordered, and Stone moved back in without hesitation. 2 more cycles of shock and compressions followed. The tension in the room grew with each passing minute. Blue kept steady count of the time, while Reed maintained the perimeter, their antennae twitching with nervous energy. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was actually only minutes, Jack gasped and coughed. "He's breathing," Blue announced, their fins rippling with excitement. Tom quickly checked Jack's vital signs as the patient's eyes fluttered open. "Pulse is returning to normal. Well done, everyone." The Academy's medical team arrived with a hover stretcher, looking somewhat bewildered at the scene before them. As they took over Jack's care, Tom turned to his students. "That," he said with a proud smile, "was exactly why we practice. You just helped save a life." The 3 students stood straighter. Even Stone's crystalline form seemed to shine brighter. Around them, the crowd of onlookers began to murmur, not in horror now, but in amazement. Human emergency medicine didn't seem so strange anymore, just different. And, as they had just witnessed, remarkably effective. The Academy's medical bay hummed with quiet activity as Jack rested in one of the recovery pods. Through the observation window, Tom, and his 3 students watched the vital signs displayed on the monitoring screens. Heart rate normal, blood pressure stable, tissue oxygenation at 99%. Blue read aloud, their fins moving gently in what Tom had learned was a sign of satisfaction. The recovery is remarkable. That's the thing about humans, Tom explained, smiling at his students. We bounce back quickly when we receive the right care at the right time. The medical bay's chief physician, Dr. Leaf, approached them. The plant-based being's leaves rustled softly as they consulted their datapad. Professor Walker, they began, their tone a mixture of respect and lingering disbelief. I've reviewed the emergency response recordings. The speed of your intervention, the force of those compressions, was exactly what was needed. Stone chimed in, their crystalline form reflecting the medical bay's soft lighting. We learned this in class. Human cardiac tissue requires significant force to maintain blood flow. Dr. Leaf's leaves quivered. Yes, well, the results speak for themselves. The patient's recovery rate is unprecedented in our records of human cardiac events. Because we didn't wait. Reed clicked excitedly. Professor taught us about the golden hour, but with cardiac arrest, it's really about the golden minutes. The doctor turned to Tom. Professor, would you and your students be willing to prepare a report on this incident for the Academy's medical board? We believe other departments could benefit from your expertise. Before Tom could answer, a soft chime indicated someone entering the medical bay. First Teacher Root glided in, her silvery skin reflecting their agitated state. Professor Walker, Root began, word of today's events has spread throughout the Academy. The Board of Education has received 17 urgent requests from various departments for human first aid training. Tom raised his eyebrows. 17. Indeed. Root's skin rippled, including, most surprisingly, a request from the High-Gravity Species Medical Division. They believe your techniques could be adapted for their patients as well. Blue suddenly straightened, their fins flaring with excitement. Professor, this is just like our class project, adapting human techniques for different species. Tom nodded proudly. It seems your idea was ahead of its time. Blue. Dr. Leaf's leaves perked up with interest. A cross-species adaptation of human emergency responses. Fascinating. Would you share your research? As Blue enthusiastically explained their project, Tom watched his other students. Reed was already taking notes with all 4 arms, while Stone had produced a small hologram showing their modified compression technique. Professor, First Teacher Root said quietly, drawing Tom aside. I must admit, I had my doubts when you first arrived. Your method seemed excessive. And now? Tom asked. Root's silver skin shimmered with what Tom had learned was their equivalent of a smile. Now I believe we have much to learn from human medicine. Your students' quick action today proved that what appears violent to one species might be vital to another. A soft groan from the recovery pod caught their attention. Jack was awake, looking around with groggy confusion. Take it easy, Tom called out. You gave us quite a scare. Jack's eyes widened as he saw the monitoring equipment. What happened? Cardiac arrest, Blue answered promptly. But we performed CPR and used the AED, just like we learned in class. You? Jack looked at the alien students in amazement. You guys saved my life. They did, Tom confirmed proudly, along with Stone's perfect compressions and Reed's excellent crowd control. Jack's eyes grew wet, and the alien students leaned forward in concern before Tom reassured them that humans sometimes produce tears from emotion, not just pain. Thank you, Jack said simply. All of you. Tom watched as his students accepted the thanks with growing confidence. In that moment, he knew that the barriers between species had begun to crumble, one life-saving technique at a time. 1 month after the cafeteria incident, Tom's classroom could barely contain its students. What had started as a small specialized class had grown into the Academy's most popular emergency response course. Today, even the observation deck was filled with instructors from other departments, watching intently. Remember, Tom said, walking between the practice stations where pairs of students worked. Each species requires different modifications to these techniques. What works for a silicon-based life form won't work for a gaseous being. Stone demonstrated to a group of crystalline students how to adjust their natural density for proper chest compressions. Their faceted surface glowed with pride as they explained, "Too much force will crush the patient. Too little won't help. You must find the perfect balance." Across the room, Blue had set up a water tank where they showed aquatic species how to recognize signs of human drowning. "Our instinct is to provide water," they explained, "but humans need air. Always remember, different species, different needs." Reed, using all four arms with impressive coordination, demonstrated bandaging techniques to a group of mixed-species students. "Human blood loss is critical," they clicked. "You must act fast, but stay precise." Tom watched his original students teach with a sense of pride. They had come so far from their initial fear of violent human medical procedures. First Teacher Root glided into the classroom, accompanied by members of the Galactic Medical Board. The visitors carried data tablets and observed the various training stations with obvious interest. "Professor Walker," Root called, their silver skin gleaming with excitement, "the board has reviewed your students' project on cross-species emergency response protocols. They are most impressed." One of the board members, a tall being composed of swirling gases, floated forward. "Indeed, your students' work on adapting human emergency techniques for different physiologies is groundbreaking." Tom smiled. "The credit goes to them." Blue first suggested the idea, and everyone contributed their unique perspectives. "That's precisely why it works," the gaseous being replied. "It's not just about teaching human methods. It's about understanding how to adapt them for any species." Around the classroom, the evidence of this adaptation was clear. Some students practiced with modified compression techniques, others worked with specialized breathing apparatus, and still others studied holographic displays of various species anatomies. Near the back of the room, Jack, fully recovered, and now a regular volunteer for demonstrations, helped students understand how different emergency techniques felt from a human patient's perspective. "The board has a proposal," Root announced. "We want to make this cross-species emergency response training mandatory for all medical students in the galaxy." The classroom fell silent. Tom blinked in surprise. "Mandatory?" "Yes," the gaseous board member confirmed. "What happened in your cafeteria proved that every medical professional should understand these techniques. We can't predict when we might need to help someone from another species." Blue swam forward excitedly. "Does this mean our adaptation guides will be used throughout the galaxy?" "With your permission." Root nodded. "The board believes your work could save countless lives across multiple species." The students burst into excited chatter. Reed's antennae quivered with joy as they clicked. From being afraid of human techniques to teaching them to the galaxy. Who would have thought? Stone chimed in, their crystalline form sparkling. "It makes perfect sense. The strength that we once feared as violent turned out to be exactly what some patients need." Tom looked around at his classroom, at the mixture of species working together, at the former barriers now broken down, at the fear replaced by understanding. This was more than just teaching first aid. It was building bridges between worlds. "Professor," Blue asked, their fins rippling with anticipation, "what do you think?" Tom smiled at his students, feeling the warmth of pride in his chest. "I think the galaxy just got a little bit smaller and a lot safer." The excited chatter resumed, now filled with plans and possibilities. Sometimes, Tom reflected, the best way to bring species together was to teach them how to save each other's lives. The Academy's grand auditorium sparkled under the light of 3 suns on graduation day. Students of all species filled the hall, their various forms creating a living rainbow of colors, textures, and shapes. On stage, First Teacher Root stood at the podium, their silver skin gleaming with pride. "Today marks a historic moment," Root announced, their voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Not only are we graduating our first class of cross-species emergency response specialists, but we're also celebrating the adoption of their protocols by over 500 medical institutions across the galaxy. In the front row, Tom sat with his original class, now transformed from nervous students into confident medical professionals. Blue's fins swayed gently with excitement, Reed's antennae twitched with anticipation, and Stone's crystalline form seemed to glow from within. Would the architects of the Universal Emergency Response Protocol please come to the stage? Root called. Blue, Reed, and Stone moved forward, along with their classmates. What had started as a simple class project had grown into something that was changing galaxy-wide medical practices. These students, Root continued, took what many considered a frightening aspect of human medicine and transformed it into a universal tool for saving lives. Their work proves that understanding our differences can lead to protecting all forms of life. The holographic displays around the auditorium showed footage from their final practical exams. Stone teaching crystalline beings how to safely perform chest compressions on various species. Blue demonstrating underwater rescue techniques that worked for both aquatic and air-breathing species. Reed showing how their forearm dexterity could be used to treat multiple types of injuries. Professor Walker. Root turned to Tom. Would you join your students? As Tom walked onto the stage, he remembered that first day when his students had flinched at the sight of CPR. Now, those same students were preparing to spread these techniques across the galaxy. The success of this program, Tom spoke to the assembled crowd, isn't just about teaching human first aid. It's about understanding that what seems dangerous to one species might be life-saving to another. My students didn't just learn techniques. They learned to see beyond their own perspectives. Jack, sitting in the audience and wearing his new emergency response certification badge, stood up and started applauding. The sound was quickly joined by various forms of appreciation from different species, from the crystalline being's melodious chiming to the gaseous species' harmonic vibrations. But our work isn't finished, Blue announced, their voice clear through their breathing apparatus. This is just the beginning. Each graduate here will go on to teach others, adapting these techniques for more species, saving more lives. Reed clicked their mandibles in agreement. We've created teaching modules for 20 different species groups so far, with more in development. And each module, Stone chimed in, their facets catching the light, includes specific modifications based on both the rescuers' and patients' physiology. First Teacher Root raised their appendages for attention. And now, by the power vested in me by the Galactic Medical Board, I present these graduates with their certifications in cross-species emergency response. As each student received their certification, Tom noticed something remarkable. The way they interacted with each other had completely changed from that first day. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just professionals who understood and respected their differences. Remember, Tom said as the ceremony concluded, every life form in this galaxy has something to teach us, and something to learn from us. Today, you've proven that what once divided us can unite us. After the ceremony, as students and families mingled in the reception hall, Jack approached Tom's original group. You know, he said, touching the spot on his chest where Stone had performed those life-saving compressions months ago, I never thought being a test subject would help change galactic medicine. Blue's fins rippled with laughter. And we never thought what we once considered violent could be so vital. That's the beauty of it, Tom smiled, watching his students, now colleagues, as they prepared to spread their knowledge across the stars. Sometimes the best way to understand each other is to learn how to save each other. And in the gleaming halls of the Galactic Medical Academy, a new era of emergency medicine had begun, one that recognized the strength in their differences and the power of working together.